I've been thinking recently about other mediums, and I've kind of mentioned on my Twitter feed, and I think on one of these videos that I'm kind of trying to broaden my horizons a little bit, and I think that this is due to uh, not game fatigue, but I think that you can get worn out on something. I suppose that is kind of fatigue, isn't it? You can experience so much, and it can be so rich and interesting in a particular medium that you kind of get a little bit bored of everything else if it isn't super high quality, or it isn't breaking new boundaries, or something that you just haven't seen before. And so I've decided over the last couple of weeks to really expand what I do with my free time, because a lot of my free time is spent writing about games, because during the day I'm working 9 to 5 writing about music, so it's kind of difficult to get some spare time in, because obviously you want to be playing lots and lots of games so that you can stay within the game's discussion, and that's kind of sad that you have to do that. And I suppose that within film criticism there isn't really that problem. You don't have to go and see every single movie ever produced to stay within the spectrum of conversation about films, but it seems that you have to play a lot of games to stay within that sort of discussion. So there's not a lot of time, but I've gone out of my way to try new things. That's kind of the whole point, and to sort of revisit some of the things that I really used to like before I very seriously started wanting to become a games critic. And largely that involved graphic novels, and it involved music, and I've never been a huge film fan, but I've decided to give a few films a go as well recently. And so with music, I've kind of been exploring a few things that I wouldn't normally explore, and just sort of also just going back to all of my all of my punk rock and hardcore stuff that I haven't really been listening to recently. But yeah, going back to that and sort of re-exploring that. So that's kind of something from my past that I've been getting back to get back with, and that's fine. That's not really narrative driven, so don't know why I just wasted 60 seconds talking about it. Graphic novels is something that has been a large part of my life for probably about five years now, I would say, and I feel I've read some of the very best. There are a fair few that I probably haven't, but I'd say I've out of the top 10 graphic novels collated off from an Amazon list or something like that, I've probably read at least half of them. And I have watched a Korean film called The Good, the Bad, the Weird, uh, and a film in a cinema called Night and Day. So going and exploring all of these different mediums, I haven't really played that many games. I've played a few bits and pieces for review, but I've not really played anything for fun, as it were. Going back and trying these different mediums, and trying to investigate new mediums like film, because film's not particularly interesting to me, has been really interesting. So it, it's made me sort of question what games do well and what games do badly. And narrative is the thing that I come back to a lot. Graphic novels and film are very passive in so much as you can't really change them. Unless it's an interactive movie, with multiple endings, you don't really have that much control over a movie. And it's the same with graphic novels. I mean, you can read it page 1 to 100, and that's essentially how you're going to read it. You can read it page 100, page 7, page 24. You can read it like that if you wanted, and I suppose that would kind of potentially change up the story somewhat. It might become a very surrealist masterpiece of storytelling. It probably won't. It probably just won't make any sense. But you could, but there's very little interaction. There's very little interactivity. So video games do interactivity very, very well. They are interactive entertainment after all. Sometimes what they don't do very well is narrative, and I'm a strong believer that narrative should be a part of games, or at least it should be a technique within games that should be utilised. That we should explore more. We should be able to have uh, strong narrative within our games. I mean, we've moved from the point where on an Atari 2600 the story was there are invaders, they are from space, and you are tasked with shooting them. It's moved from that to something like Uncharted 2, which for me at the moment is probably the pinnacle of sort of traditional Western storytelling within video games. So it's a very simple Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider-esque story presented with a lot of humour and a lot of charm, and with likeable characters and very good voice acting and that kind of thing. But to be fair, that's about as good as it gets. I mean, there are other games that try weirder things with narrative, such as No More Heroes 2, and another pseudo title, Killer 7, and Okami, and all of these different games, and they do weird stuff, but there's nothing particularly. There are very few and far between games that deal with very subtle emotions, very minute moments and minute elements, and that's kind of got me thinking, because even within Night and Day, which is an all-out action flick with Tom Cruise and I think it's Cameron Diaz. I think that's her name. She's from Charlie's Angels, the blonde one from Charlie's Angels. Um, uh, Tom Cruise and the blonde one from Charlie's Angels basically go out on a big spy mission thing. But there are moments of just sort of there are just sort of touching moments. There are moments when there are close-ups on someone's face, and you can tell without being hammered over the head that a person is feeling a certain quite complex emotion. And it's nothing new to Hollywood. And don't get me wrong, 90% of the movie is not subtle emotion. It's 90%. 90% of the movie is Tom Cruise being pretty badass and redeeming himself after being a one of those religious nut jobs, which name escapes me. But what are they called? I don't know. This is wasting time. But yeah, so that's kind of what the film does, but video games very rarely have subtle emotions, and I've kind of been thinking, well, maybe why is that? Why do video games not have that many subtle emotions within them? And maybe they can't. Maybe video games can't do that. Maybe I'm wrong, and games are very limited in a certain way, and maybe this isn't the perfect medium that I think it is. I don't think though, but it's possible, and that's kind of been creeping in. So I've kind of been thinking about that, and I think there are a few instances of complex storytelling, and I've been playing one of those games recently, and that's the original Mass Effect. It does it quite. It does subtle emotion, strangely, quite unsubtly. The way it does them is essentially just close zoom ups on some of the characters' faces after you've made a decision after you've made a branching decision. So if somebody says to you, I'm really sorry that my platoon got wiped out and I feel bad about it. If you say, hey, don't you worry about it, that's not your fault, you couldn't know, you'll see a sort of slight smirk appear on not a smirk, slight smile, or like a comforted smile appear on the person's face. And so that's not particularly subtle emotions, but it is moving towards it. I'm yet to play Mass Effect 2, and that's something that I'm very interested in exploring, and hopefully they move that forward. But Mass Effect does do subtle emotions, and it's kind of hope that it can go somewhere, that games can eventually do very complex and very subtle things within narrative. But that's kind of the point. That my point is that it's potentially troubling that games very rarely do subtle emotion, because until they do, we are only going to have bombastic and crazy stories. We are only going to have narratives that are giant space marine kills hordes of aliens. We are only going to have resolutions that are and someone dies. We aren't going to have resolutions of and by the end of the story everything is the same again. You know, we aren't going to have. I think the moment that we will find that games have truly arrived as a medium is when we can do something very Chekhovian, when we can, when we can have the equivalent of our Chekhov play, when we can have a story that lasts X amount of time and very little happen in terms of action, but a lot happen in terms of character relation and emotion. And that's kind of, yeah, that's kind of what I've wanted to sort of spitball with you. Spitballing is kind of essentially what we do, isn't it? Thank you for the lovely person that left a comment on my YouTube video the other day, and thank you for everybody who drops me messages on Twitter after they've watched this utter shambles that I call a vlog. Do keep them coming in. Twitter.com/XeroXeroXero is my Twitter account, and you can find me on XeroXeroXero.wordpress.com. Zero is, as always, spelt XERO, because I don't think about names when I name myself, and X isn't particularly audio friendly, is it? Yeah, and so yeah, drop me a message, and I will speak to you very soon.